Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IOL exam-based contact class. My name is Benedict Nakuta, and I will be talking to you for the next 45 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember this is an exam-based contact class. You would recall that you have 3 examination papers. One, you are writing in April. Second one, you are writing in August. And the third one, you are writing in November, all 2018. Now, these guidelines that I'm going to present to you is basically a combination of all 3 of them in one. In other words, I'm not giving you a separate one for April, neither a separate one for August, neither a separate one for November. But I've combined all the information into one presentation. So you need to remember, studying is very important. You need to study in order for you to pass. If you don't study, obviously you are not going to make it. So it's very important to study. Secondly, let's talk about the structure of the exam paper. The exam paper is structured in the following way. There's 70% of the questions that counts for 70% out of the 120 marks. In other words, it's 84 marks. Now that one, the first component focus on basic knowledge and comprehension, just whether to check whether you understand the information. And the second level is high level of understanding, where the emphasis is on application. Application basically means, can you do it practically? Can you do it practically? And the third one is very high level of understanding, which is the second part. Practical application is 20%, plus the 70% of the first one is 90%, and the last one is 10%, where you must make critical understanding, critical analysis. In other words, can you critique something? What do you think of it? It's good or bad, and so on. So that is the structure of the examination paper. The first one is very important because it says 70%. In other words, if you do well there, then maybe you can pass. So the first part is very, very, very important. So your focus should be critically be on that one. All right. Now let's now get into the actual details of the content of the examination papers. Okay. Now the first part is basic knowledge and comprehension. Basic knowledge and comprehension questions. Now here, you are basically saying, do you understand something? For example, I can ask you a straightforward question. What is a vehicle? I'm just making an example that is not in the question paper. What is a vehicle? A vehicle is a car with 4 wheels that drives a person from point A to point B. Takes me from Windhoek to Oshakati. That's a car. Do you understand that? Basic knowledge. So in this part of the question paper, we just ask you something that is in the content and check whether you understand. Right. So for example, the first part is focused on comparative and history of education with practical examples of it. In other words, we can ask you, what is comparative education? Now there the focus is you compare the education system of one country with another country. For example, you can compare the education system of Namibia with that of China. Compare the education system of Namibia with that of South Africa. That kind of thing. Why do you compare the education systems of the 2 countries? You compare educational problems and the solutions for that. And how to improve the education system of the country. So what are the educational problems of Namibia, for example? So maybe, for example, comparative education say, okay, in the past we had problems that all black children go to school. That's an educational problem. What was the solution? After independence, we get more schools. You see, so as to improve it. Now, if more children goes to school, then it means more children can contribute towards the economic development of the country. Unemployment become less, and these children can also lead a productive life. They can contribute towards the development of the country. I hope you understand what I'm saying. What is the history of education? Now, history, if you know, maybe from other modules or from your own understanding, history always look at the past. You need to study the past in order to understand what is happening presently. For example, the history of education in Namibia is that there was apartheid education before independence. You know, South Africa ruled the country, and they basically, apartheid South Africa, make separate schools for blacks, separate schools for whites. Black people were seen as second-class citizens, whites were seen on top. They had the best schools, the best education, the best facilities, so that they can have better positions in society. Now that's the history of education in Namibia. So that is examples of that. So you must look about those kind of examples as well. Yeah. The second thing that I want you to look at there is colonialism. What is colonialism? I just referred you to South Africa. South Africa was the colonial power of Namibia. South Africa subjected Namibia to colonialism. Colonialism basically means another country rule another country illegally without the agreement of the people. So you rule that country by force. So can you give examples of that? Not just Namibia, but other countries as well. And then bullet point number 4 there, educational goals. What are the educational goals in Namibia? After independence, we talk about equity, democracy, equality, and quality. Now, equity basically means, after independence, sharing the educational resources equally. A school in Oshakati should have the same resources like the one in Windhoek. Remember earlier I spoke about apartheid, where there was no equity. White schools had more facilities than black schools. Now, come after independence, our own government said, share it equally. Democracy, children can have a right to talk in schools, participate. SRCs, teachers can belong to teachers' unions, and so on. And quality, education must be of good quality. The teachers must teach well, teachers must be qualified, and so on. That is quality. It refers to quality. So those kind of things, you need to understand those kind of things. All right. And next one, the next one is under still the first part, the 70% part, level 1 is financing of ICT in schools. So what should be financed in terms of ICT in schools? When we talk about ICT in schools, what are we referring to? ICT means information communications technology. Does the schools have computers? Do they have internet? Like now I'm speaking to you via video recording. That is ICT. You are sitting somewhere in Oshakati, maybe in Swakopmund, maybe in Opuo, maybe in Keetmanshoop. It's ICT. So all of you don't have to come to Windhoek. We speak via communication. Information communications technology. So we communicate to you through a video. That is ICT. Now, does the schools have this kind of facilities? Does the school have internet, emails, and so on? Now, the issue is who should finance these particular ICT resources? And why should it be finances? Because you see, it helps with development. Children can understand things better. And what should be finances? So you must look in your book and see, for example, what is it when you refer to ICT? Like I said, it's computers, but you must also check others. You must also understand what are the other things there. Yes. And then the next topic under the 70% is homeschooling. What is homeschooling? Homeschooling basically, in short, is a child don't have to go to a formal school. For example, the child doesn't have to go to Moshvendeka High School there in Ngodiva. The child is studying at home, but there are certain advantages. For example, an advantage of that is if this particular child is being bullied at the school. Now, homeschooling the child is just studying at home. A few children comes together at the teacher's place and they are studying just there in the teacher's place. And that one who is bullying that particular one is not there. So that's an advantage. Then the child does not have those stress, the child is not being bullied, and the child is happy. But there are also certain disadvantages of homeschooling. It's an advantage the children can learn on their own, free, good environment, peaceful environment. But there's also disadvantages. So you need to understand, you must read that and also see what is the advantages and what is the disadvantages of that. What is EdCep? The next one is EdCep. Now EdCep, ladies and gentlemen, also came after independence. Your book, if you study your module, you will see it happens after independence. Education Training Sector Improvement Program. Now the emphasis there is on improvement, to improve the education sector. So what are the objectives? One objective, broadly speaking, is to improve the education sector. How? How does it want to do it? Training more teachers? Yes, to improve it so that the teacher, a qualified teacher, can teach better because he's having the qualifications. He went to university, to the college to study how to teach. So why did we do that? Why you want to improve the education sector and how? You must also understand how. So you need to understand those things as well. Let's continue. The next bullet on my slides is NIET. What is the role of NIET? NIET stands for National Institute of Educational Development, based in Okahanja. The purpose of that institute falls under Ministry of Education is to improve, to develop education. How? I'll give you two examples. One is to improve pre-primary education and primary education, and to improve teacher education. You guys are now in a teacher education program, the diploma that you are now studying. Teacher education is you are studying to become a teacher. So NIET also plays a role there, where the teachers are coming to NIET or Okahanja for workshops. They learn certain things that they must go and apply back at their schools. So you need to also understand what is the role of NIET. It's a directorate under education, Ministry of Education. The last point there, under this particular slide, ladies and gentlemen, is educational rights. What is educational rights and to whom is it accorded? Simply, it refers to the rights of children to go to school. Every child has a right to go to school. If you look at the Namibian Constitution, they say, Article 20, every child between the age of 6 and 16 must attend primary education. You would know a few years ago, Article 20 says free and compulsory primary education, basic education from grade 1 to grade 10. You would know a few years ago that school fees was compulsory. And a few years ago, 3 or 4, 5 years ago, the former president, Ifikepunye Pohamba, abolished that thing. So that's why now you see that primary basic education is free of charge. Children don't have to pay school fees. So those are educational rights. You must not now tell the child, a principal cannot tell the child, no, you cannot come to school because you don't have the money. No. School fees has been abolished. Children can come to school free of charge. So that is very important. That is under educational rights. Yeah. Also under educational rights, what is also important is that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children. Please read your module, read your study guide, and see what that thing is saying. There's 2 articles that they are mentioning there. Children has the right to education and to attend primary school. Children should not be discriminated against, and children can go to every school where he or she wants. You remember a few minutes ago I spoke about before independence, there was apartheid education. there was discrimination in education, where white children go to separate schools, colored children go to separate schools, and black children go to black schools. So after independence, we said, no, every child has a right to go to a school where he or she wants. And there should be no discrimination on the basis of its color. That's why you see many schools these days are integrated. There are black children and there are white children in the same schools, because discrimination is not allowed. So that is the rights of children, coming from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children, and also being applied in Namibia, because you see we are a child of the United Nations. We are a member of the United Nations, and if they make laws, conventions, all their member states must apply it. Next, what are also the rights of teachers? Now, if you read your module, you will see that some of the rights that a teacher is having is that he is having freedom to belong to a trade union. You would know that there's a teachers union called Namibia National Teachers Union, NANTU. In Namibia, there is another teachers union called Teachers Union of Namibia, TUN, TUN. So part of the rights of teachers is that teachers have the right to belong to those trade unions. That is in the constitution of the country. The constitution says everyone has the freedom of association. In other words, you can associate yourself with NANTU, with TUN, and nobody can have a problem with that. Nobody can prosecute you for that. Nobody can prevent you from belonging to a trade union. It's your right to belong to the trade union. So those are the rights of teachers. Yeah. Teachers also have the right to participate in public life. In other words, if a teacher wants to stand for a counselor, he can do that in the community. I'm a teacher in Katatura at PPS, People's Primary School. I belong to SWAPO or to DTA or to which other political party, and the people choose me to become a counselor. It's your right. So these are some of the rights of teachers also, to participate in public life. They cannot say, no, you cannot, because the Constitution guarantees that. So please check that as well. All right? Yeah. And then the next slide talks about minimum age convention. Now, if you look at your study guide, you will see that it talks about the minimum age convention. That also comes from the United Nations. Earlier, I spoke about children between the age of 6 and 16, where our constitution in Namibia says they must go to school. So check also what the United Nations Convention says about when the children must be in school, that same year, 6 to 16, when can they start to work, minimum age convention. Children are not supposed to start to work before age 15. They're supposed to be at school. But check what your module is saying, when can they start to work, minimum age convention. And then also straightforward basic knowledge and understanding. What are the philosophies of Plato, Nyerere, Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, and Bowles and Gintes? I'm not going to tell you these things, it's in your book. I will just take one. You see, for example, who of those guys that I mentioned, Plato, Nyerere, Kenyatta, Bowles and Gintes, talk about Harambe? You know now in Namibia, why I choose Harambe? Because your book is talking about it, your study guide, and also now you talk about Harambe in Namibia, the Harambe Prosperity Plan. You know when President Geingob was elected 4 years ago, his policy document to drive the governance of the country, development of the country, he came up with the Harambe Prosperity Plan, where he says nobody should be left out. Harambe is a Swahili word. It's one of those guys I mentioned. Maybe I can just give you a hint. It's either Nyerere or Kenyatta, where he said nobody must be left out, talks about unity. People must be united. So, and that's why you see the president says nobody must be left out. We must all be united. Everybody must participate in the development of Namibia. So you need to understand those philosophies. What is Plato's philosophy? Straightforward, A, B, C, D. And what is Nyerere saying? What is Julius Nyerere saying? A, B, C, D. What is Kenyatta saying? A, B, C, D. And what is Bautzen Ginter saying? What are their philosophies in education? Bautzen Ginter says something. You must read those kind of things because it can either be in the April exam, or it can be in the August exam, or it can be in the November exam. You need to understand those things. All right. Yeah. Let's continue, ladies and gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these things that I spoke to you about now, basic knowledge and comprehension, basic knowledge and understanding. Do you understand what is history of education? Comparative education, you compare two countries, history, you look at the past. Do you know what is this concept like colonialism, where one country occupies another country illegally? You remember I talked about educational goals, quality, access, equity, democracy. Access means more children must come into schools, and that is after independence, after 1990, where our government comes up with the philosophy, say, education for all, based on 4 goals: access, equity, quality, and democracy. And then I explained, I talk about financing of ICT in school. What do you mean with ICT? Who should finance it, and why should it be financed? Homeschooling, like I said, a few children come together, being learned, they are being educated at the home, as opposed to the normal where they all go to the school. You remember I make the example of Moshi Pandeka, for example. Homeschooling is you don't go there, you sit at the house, maybe the teacher's house, maybe you have 6, 10 children, and you are being taught there, educated there. Remember I said that is the advantage, you are not being bullied. If there's a bully, maybe you don't like the formal school, but it's also having certain disadvantage, and I said you must read that. And then I spoke about EDSEP, Education Sector Improvement Program. Remember I said the emphasis is on improvement. What do you want to improve, and how do you want to improve it? Please read that as well. And then I spoke about NIAD, National Institute of Educational Development. Emphasis, ladies and gentlemen, educational development. How do you want to develop the education? I used the example of primary education, how you want to improve primary education, and also how you want to improve teacher education. The teachers are better equipped to teach the children better, so that the children can learn better and can pass, and one day becomes a doctor, a teacher, a nurse, and contribute towards the country's economy. And then I talked about educational rights, the rights of children. Remember I said children between the age of 6 and 16, free compulsory education in Namibia, and also that comes from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child. And then I also spoke about the rights of teachers, for example, where teachers have the right to belong to trade unions. And then, yes, I told you what is the minimum age convention, and then the philosophies of Plato, Nyerere, Kenyatta, Bautzen and Gintes. I used the one of Harambe. You must check which of these 4 guys talks about Harambe, and I explained that to you. And then inclusive education. What is inclusive education? Inclusive education basically means you bring together children with disabilities and children with no disabilities into one classroom. That's why I call it inclusive. Not the situation where you have, for example, if you are from the north, you see there is Elua Special School. That is a special school separate for children with disabilities, children who cannot see and who are blind. That is Elua Special School. Here in Windhoek, you have Morrison, also for children who have disabilities. You have Dagbreek in town, also for children with disabilities. But now, with inclusive education, you bring all of them together in one classroom. You don't have a separate classroom for children with special schools and for children, the normal ones with no special needs, but you bring all of them together. That is inclusive education. All right. Okay, I spoke about teachers' rights and responsibilities. They have the right to belong to a trade union. Responsibilities, of course, the teacher must teach. He must not just sit in the class and just read newspapers. Let you give me an example. I know about one teacher who did not take his responsibilities seriously. For example, the children would write a test and he never marked the children's test. So he gave the children ghost marks. And that teacher was fired. So he did not execute his responsibility. Teacher must do his responsibility. If the children write the test, he must mark the books. You see, and then the principal and others ask him, where's your test marks? They didn't find it. They went to his house, they find the papers, the things were never marked, and he just gave the children marks out of the blue. So it's clear that teacher did not do his responsibility. And you know, when you don't do your responsibility, the consequences, you can be fired. Yes. And then I talk about children's rights. You remember I said the right to go to school between the age of 6 and 16. And what happens, and the right to learn, and what happens if that right is violated. In other words, if you don't abide by that right, what can happen? You must read your book also. What is the book saying about that? Secondly, the second part of the examination papers that only count for 20% of the marks. Now we are finished with the 70%. Now we get to the 20% where the focus is on higher level of understanding and application. Now what does application mean? Application basically means, can you do it in practice? For example, can you ride a bicycle? That's application. Let me use the example of a car. First you study for a learner's license, right? You get your learner's license, basic knowledge. What is this stop street means? It means you stop. What does a red robot means? Traffic light means you must not drive. Green, you must proceed. Now, that is now the learners, you got it, the basic knowledge, understanding. Now, application means can you apply it? So now that is now where the traffic officer take you into town. He sit next to you, you can see whether can you change the gears without the car making boom, 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 boom. And then, okay, this person is not good, so this person cannot apply. He cannot drive the car, he cannot do it. But okay, this guy, the car does not make boom, boom, boom. He stop at the right place, he can change gears. Now this person is good, I can give him the license. Application. Now here, for example, you need to demonstrate practical understanding and application. Can you do it? For example, the rights of children in the context of teaching and learning. For example, you see, how will you apply it? For example, let me give you an example. You will see to it, for example, that children in your community are not at home. Children between the age of 6 and 16 are at school. That is application. So you maybe will say, you will talk to your principal and say, why can't we go to that community, the counselor, and say, why are these children not at school? You see? You see that they are in school. Remember what I talk about, the United Nations Convention? Children between 6 and 16 must be in school, and our constitution also says that. So can you apply that? Secondly, what will you do if that right to education is being violated? In other words, what will you do? Can you tell me something what you will do about that? So maybe, like for example, the Sun children, if you look in Chumkwe, Gam, also that side of Kavango regions, Caprivi region or Angwena region, I've seen, for example, many Sun children are not in school. Even here in Omaheke region or Shishonjupa region, what do you do? Because that is a violation of their right. The constitution says they must be in school. So if they are not in school, we can say that right is being violated. So what will you do about that? To make sure that the Sun children are also in school. Something like that. Can you apply it if I ask you such a question in the exam? Teachers' rights and responsibilities. Remember what I was saying. The teacher has the right to belong to a trade union. Now, what if the principal comes and says, no, you cannot belong to the teachers' union? What do you do about that? You can tell the teacher practically, say, no, you cannot do it. That is against my rights. I can belong to a union. The principal maybe belongs to TUN, and he says, no non-to member is allowed in the school. Is that legal? Can he do that? I want you to check whether you understand those things. Responsibilities of teachers. You remember, I'm making an example of a teacher who didn't mark the children's exam papers, the children's test, not exam papers, a test. And he just give the children ghost marks out of his head. You see, clearly that teacher did not do his responsibilities well. Right. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. And the last bullet there, on this slide, application of philosophies studied in this course. You remember I talk about the philosophies of Plato, Kenyatta, Nyerere, Pauls and Gittes. How will you apply it? For example, I use that example of Harambe, you see, that stresses unity. So what will you do to ensure that there's unity in the classroom? The children are united. The children are not fighting. What will you do if, for example, some of them are fighting in the class? You must do something about that. Very important. So can you apply it? I just want to see where you understand. How will you try to make sure that in your classroom there's unity? You make sure that the children work together. They help each other. If the one is struggling, the other one can help each other, and so on, so that there is unity. Can you apply that? Can you apply that? Look at the others, Plato, what is he saying, and how will you apply his philosophy? Pauls and Gittes, how will you apply that philosophy, etc., etc. But as I said, please read your information. The next one is yes, inclusive education. Also, how will you apply it? Yes. Remember I said inclusive education, you bring all the children together. But remember there's also limitations, right? You bring them in one classroom together. Children with special needs that need extra attention, special means extra attention, and children that is normal, between inverted commas, they don't need extra attention. But application, how will you do it? Can you do it practically in the classroom? You must make sure that they all learn, because they're the same syllabus, they also learn from the same syllabus, the same curriculum. These ones you teach them 1 + 1 is 2 in this way, and these other ones you must also teach in the same way. 1 + 1 is 2 in the same way. But I want to tell you there is also limitations to that. Let's say this particular child is seriously disabled, right? He can totally not see. Even if you teach there in front of the classroom, that child is having a problem. So you must also know that mainstreaming is having some limitations. So you cannot bring that totally child to the classroom. Another child is having a Down syndrome, where he cannot talk, cannot walk, he cannot speak, cannot write. So that one also you cannot mainstream him. So what I'm trying to say is that with inclusive education, there's also limitations. Only children with moderate, mild, little disabilities, you can bring them in the normal classroom. Not children with serious disabilities. So please, you must know there's also limitations to that. Don't now say, I said everyone, even if the child is very sick with the Down syndrome, can also come to the normal class. No, you must know there's some limitations to that. Yes. But the key word here is inclusive. You bring them all integrated into one classroom. Because then there's also advantage. Then the government don't have to spend a lot of schools for special schools separately, you build another school there, and you build another school for children, the so-called normal children. You bring them all together in one classroom, but remember, as I said, there's limitations, depending on how serious is the disability. For example, I just told you, a child who's very sick, cannot walk, cannot write, cannot talk, who's just lying in the bed, you cannot bring that one to the school. So you must know there's some limitations to that as well. All right. And then the next one here still is application. If you say to you, okay, ICT, there's no ICT facilities, how will you go about to bring them practically to the school? What will you do to bring them practically to the school? Maybe, I'm giving you an example, maybe you will go and look for money. From whom? Maybe there's a rich guy in your community that you can approach and say, sir, we want to bring computers to the classroom. Can you sponsor us? And so on, and so on, and so on. I'm just giving you an example to check how will you practically do it. Remember here the application, the focus is on application. How will you do it? I'm just giving you an example that you can approach a rich businessman and say, help us, man, sponsor us 2 or 3 or 4 computers in the classroom. All right. The second one, application of inclusive education and positive discipline. You remember I earlier explained to you inclusive education. I will not repeat it. I told you, you're bringing children together with disabilities and with non-disabilities, but I said there's a limitation. You must remember, depending on how serious is the disability. What is positive discipline? Before independence, there was corporal punishment where the teacher takes out the cane and hit the children. Positive discipline say no corporal punishment. You must not hit the children, no cane. So how will you how will you ensure that you have positive discipline in your class? Basically, you use what your book is calling learner-centered methods, where children learn together, you put them into groups to work together. They can work in pairs, 2 to work together. And because when children are busy, there's no time to play around. They can study on their own, they can learn their schoolwork. So that is what we mean with positive discipline. They help each other. There's discipline in the class, but in a positive way. Whereas, corporal punishment, the children get pain, they don't like it, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then the next one there is straightforward. What is the components of an educational system in a practical understanding? The components of educational system, basically, your book talks about the structure of education system, the language of the institution, primary education, secondary education, higher education, and assessment of education. For example, language of the institution, our schools, the medium of instruction as from grade 4 is English. So that is practically application. How will you ensure that? From grade 0 up to grade 3 is mother tongue. Most schools in the 4 regions, so Oshwambo, Oshikwanyama, Oshindonga, schools in Kavango West, Kavango East, Ukwangali, Silozi in Caprivi, Zambezi region. Vanduk schools is combination of Oshwambo, Ondonga, Oshindonga, Oshikwanyama, Oshierero, Khoikhoi, Goba, Afrikaans, and English, and so on, because there's a lot of different tribes in the same school. So those kind of things, can you understand that education system, the components of education system? Higher education, degrees, secondary education, 8, junior secondary education, 8 to 10, senior secondary education, 11 and 12. Can you apply that? Do you understand what is meant with that? And then the last one there is influence of economic factors on education. Give a practical understanding. Let me help you here. For example, you see economic factors, for example, one is poverty. Namibia also they say that there's a lot of poverty. Some people are very poor. Now, if my parents are poor, they cannot afford me to go to school. Remember I talked earlier about, I said education system has done away with school fees. But I still need food, I still need school clothes, and so on. Now, if my parents are poor, they don't work, I wouldn't be able to get this. And then I decide, okay, I drop out of school because of poverty at home. And if I drop out of school, it means I don't have any education. I remain poor, I remain unemployed, and that also means I don't become a fully productive citizen of the country, and I will not be able to contribute towards making a contribution to the development of the country. I cannot, because I drop out of school, I cannot become a doctor, a teacher, a nurse, or whatever, because I'm unemployed. So that's why you must understand, how does economic factors influence education. So if there's a lot of poverty, the level of education will not be good. And those children who come from poor backgrounds will not be going to school. That's why you see so many children, because of poor backgrounds, they drop out of school. And once you drop out of school, you can't reach your full potential, you can't become a nurse or a doctor or whatever, and you cannot make a contribution to the society. That's why they say it's important to take away the poverty so that people can make a contribution to society, that people can become something in life. I want to become a teacher, I want to become a doctor, I want to become a lawyer, and so on. So that is what we mean. How does those economic factors influence education? All right. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the second part. You remember there I said higher level understanding and application is the doing part. How will you ensure that children are in school? Rights of the children. What will you do when those rights are violated? What are the rights of teachers? Do part belongs to a union. What are the responsibilities? Do part, they must mark, they must teach the children. They cannot stay away from the school. Some teachers, when they get paid, they don't come to work for that whole month, because the 20th, that whole week, do that teacher then execute his responsibilities? Definitely not. So what do you do in those things if the teacher does not do his responsibilities? The philosophies, Kenyatta, Nyerere, the others that I talk about, how will you apply it in your class? Unity, Harambe, for example. What will you do when there's no ICT facilities in your school? What will you do about it? How will you apply inclusive education? What will you make to ensure that those things are there? Positive discipline, there's unity in the class, no corporal punishment. You don't use it. You don't beat the children, because you will be in trouble. And then influence of economic factors. You remember I spoke about poverty and so on. And if there's poorness, people cannot make a contribution. Lastly, the third part, that is only 10% of the examination. There the focus is on critical thinking. Can you analyze? Can you think what is good about this particular thing, what is not so good about this particular thing, and what can be done about it? For example, the infrastructure in schools. You remember I talked about ICT in schools. So, do many of our schools have ICT, computers, internet, etc.? And why? If you say yes, do you think it's good? If you say those computers, internet things, facilities is not in the school, that kind of thing. So you analyze, you critique it. You say, I think it's there and it helps in this way. I think it's not there. And if it's not there, what is the disadvantage? A child who's having a computer in the school in Windhoek, for example, in comparison with a child who is not have seen a computer in Okongo, for example, what is the disadvantage? Obviously, that child in Okongo is disadvantaged in comparison with that child in Windhoek, who sees the computer, can go onto the internet, he can type and Google some information, get more information. So that is the analysis that I'm looking at. Secondly, education for all. You remember we spoke about education for all? I told you the education for all after independence has 4 goals: access, equity, quality, and democracy. Now when you make an analysis, is access being expanded? Yes, more children are in schools because more schools has been built all over the country, in all the 14 regions of the country. equity? Is it equal distribution of resources? Quality? Are many teachers qualified? Democracy, children, SRCs, and so on. Teachers belongs to unions. So what do you think about it? You must make an analysis. Remember, analysis, like I said, you look at the good part and you look at the not so good part, the good and the bad, the strength and the shortcomings. And then you say, I think there's more schools being built, but maybe, I'm just giving you examples, maybe the quality is not so good because many children are failing still, many teachers are still unqualified, and so on and so on and so on. It depends how you see it. And then lastly here, under the rights of children and teachers, you remember I talked about what is the rights of children. You remember I used the example of the San children. That is a weakness. So that is an analysis. Many of the San children are not in school, but of course we know that it's because of their culture. Their culture is they are not being sent to school. But what can we do about that? What can the government do to help them to come to schools? And what is the rights of teachers, for example? Teachers also have the right to belong to unions and so on and so on. So these are the kind of things. But you remember this part 3.3, critical thinking, only 12%, 12 marks out of the whole 120. The whole paper is 120. The first part is 70% and 20% and 10%. So like I was telling you right in the beginning, you must make sure that the 70% part, you do well there. Because if you do well in 70%, maybe even if you don't do well with the other 30%, you can still make it. But you must try to understand level 1, basic understanding, 70%. Second part, 20%, comprehension. Can you apply? Can you do it practically? Remember I said, I used the example of you have a learner's license, you must now go and test, drive out. You must pass out. So you go for the testing drive where the traffic officer take you. Can you really drive now? Can you drive? That's the doing part, application part. And the last part is the critical analysis part, which is only 12 marks or 10% of the paper. Good luck and all the best. And I wish you all the best and success. But as I said, remember also in the beginning, if you don't study, you will not be successful. And don't study only at the last minute. You know, tomorrow you are writing. Now you only start today. Obviously, you are not going to make it. You must at least study a week, 2 weeks before the time, and read. As the time goes on, read. Cut down on your friends. Cut down on watching TV, the soapies and so on. Read. Because if you leave it for too late, you will not make it. So good luck, and I hope this session has helped. I thank you, and all the best.